Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this connected world. Welcome to a special edition of our Connected Data webinar series, where we look at combating the Great Resignation. I'll start off with some introductions. So I'm the moderator of today's session. My name is Andy Waller. Once upon a time, I looked like that. I have a long career in market research operations. I am now the head of strategic partnerships for Datamatics. Prior to that, I was Chief Operating Officer at Holland Partners and in charge of operations for Synovate. So that's me. If we move on, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Bikramjit Chowdhury, who is head of data science and analytics for Datamatics. Dr. Bikramjit has worked for a number of esteemed organisations, including consultancies and market research. He's widely published and is an excellent presenter on the circuit. So and is also an ever-present on our Connected Data webinar series. So Dr. Bikramjit, welcome to you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everybody.
Delighted to be joined by Piyush. Piyush is a VP of HR at Johnson & Johnson. He describes himself as a bilingual leader, so he has a unique combination of general management and HR expertise, and we're looking forward to him giving us the benefit of both of those viewpoints today. He's worked in 5 different developed and developing countries and has a wealth of experience in implementing digital solutions. So we're looking forward to hearing from you today, Piyush. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Andy, for the invite. Glad to be here.
Our last panelist, and this is in no particular order, is Natalie. So Natalie Smith joins us from Holland Partners, where she is the global head of delivery. Natalie's worked in both market research agencies and consultancies. Has a load of experience both operationally and in the business management and leadership. I've worked with Natalie for many years, so I know that she's one of the people that is the most caring about people and culture that I've ever worked with, and I can't think of anyone better to have on this panel. So Natalie, a great personal thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for the invite and welcome to everyone.
Excellent. So let's come on to the topic of today's webinar then. If we can build the chart. There's, according to Gartner, the global rate of attrition doubled from 10% in 2020 to 20% in 2021. That's an annual rate of attrition. Please keep building the slide. There's some studies which suggest that the cost of attrition is as much as 33% of the employee's annual salary. So if I'm an employee who's earning £30,000 and I leave my organisation, the hidden cost of them replacing me is £10,000. So if attrition doubles, you can see that it has a major impact on the bottom line of organisations. I saw a piece of research today which said that 72% of workers in the tech workers are considering leaving their job in the next 12 months, which is astonishing if you think about it. So I think this is it's clearly a topical subject. It's a very important subject. What we're going to do is start us off with a poll. And that poll, I threw a few numbers out there earlier. But so according to Willis Towers Watson's 2022 Global Benefits and Attitudes Survey, 44% of employees globally are job seekers. And the poll is, what do we expect this number to be over the next 12 months? And we should see a poll being launched imminently. We as panelists won't be able to answer the poll, but you guys will. Here we are. So will it be, and this, you can only select a single choice from this one, less than 20%, 21 to 35%, 36 to 45%, 46 to 55%, or 56% and above. Guys on the panel, while other people are filling in this poll, what do we think? We're expecting it to stay the same, go down, go up?
Andy, I think it will slow down a little. So if I was to answer, I hate to be I'd say sort of 21 to 35% would be my gut feeling, in that I expect it to slow a little, but not go down to kind of what we were expecting before, which was sort of 10 to 15%.
Right.
I would agree with Natalie. I think there's so much talk of recession. We are seeing some of the job losses just beginning to happen. That will certainly have an impact. And this number could remain the same or could come down slightly, would be my guess.
Yeah.
I will agree with that, especially with the economic downturn that is being seen across the globe and many extraneous factors also playing a role. So there might be a little bit of a slowdown in the attrition rate as well. It's not going to be less than 20%, but could be in the bracket of 21 to 35. That's what I anticipate.
Yeah, I think that's probably right as well. I think certainly the economy will have an impact. So could we close the poll now? Have we got enough people? And maybe we could have a look at the answers and see who was right. Hopefully you don't all three spend the whole hour agreeing with each other. Let's see.
Yeah, we'll have to start fights, but we'll do our best.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, can we see the results? So were we right? There we go. 21 to 35. So a third of people agree with our panel. But the highest, in fact, if you look at the top two boxes, 60% of people think it will be higher in the next 12 months than it was at the moment. So that's interesting. Let's see. But I think what we can certainly take from that is this is a challenge which isn't going away. And I think we'd probably all agree with that. Okay, thanks everybody for taking the first poll. So Natalie, now if I can perhaps come to you, we sort of spoke about some statistics. We heard from the audience there that this is here to stay. What are you seeing, around in your industry and around you in terms of the impact of the Great Resignation?
I think there's four things. And I'm not sure it's industry specific. I think every employer and employee is experiencing this in some spectrum or degree. The first theme is we're all sort of feeling this power shift to the employee rather. And so rather than having a paycheck, they've got a voice now. And they've got sort of momentum and a complete shift in market dynamics on their side. And then the other kind of on the other side of it, I think there's change expectations for employers. So it's no longer about providing a paycheck. It's what you value, what you celebrate, what you stand for, and really providing connection to the employee. So digging a little deeper, I think that the employees are demanding more in terms of flexibility, in terms of culture, in terms of training, and also they're demanding a bigger pay package and benefits. So it really, I think, has rebalanced the dynamic between the employer and the employee. The other thing I think that's contributing to this is, I think for all of us, it was a reset moment in our lives. So part of the Great Resignation is people not just doing lateral move or switching to a competitor, but it was like, actually, I'm going to go back to school, or I'm going to go back to Australia, or I'm going to go do something differently, because COVID's really made me reassess what's important in my life. So I think on the employee side, there's this real huge dynamic shift and change. And then for us, I think in leadership on employers, leadership, as we spoke about, everyone's in the business of HR now. So no one can look sort of micro and siloed at what they're doing. We're all in the business of being empathetic and listening and being teachers. So you can no longer sort of compartmentalize, I think, what you do. So that's the first thing, I think, is this interesting power shift that's going on. The second key theme or key driver, I think, is digital. And I see digital as being dividing, but connection still matters. So I think for employees and employers, everything's become digitized. We're on Zoom right now, which is great. I can talk to my team in London earlier and more frequently. I'm not sure they enjoy that, but there's some real perks, I think, to this digitized transformation that we've all gone through, but it's divisive. So for some people, they want more, for some people, they want less. And so again, it's really challenging to work out whether you mandate or you provide flexibility. Because at the core of this digitalization that's happened is, I think, connection still matters. So there's still moments you need to have fun. There's still moments you need to coach and train. There's moments that you need to come together and celebrate your values or a win or whatever it is. So I think it's easy to overlook the importance of connection in this digitized way, and how and where you show up for that and are purposeful about that. I think employers need to be really considerate about. The third theme, I think, is around planning to replan. And as businesses, we've seen so much disruption. So the impact of the Great Resignation on businesses has been this abundance of change and churn. So Hall & Partners, people are our product and they're our key asset. So high churn into this product makes very, very challenging for delivery. And we're seeing similar trends in the US and the UK around this point. But what we're also seeing is it's not just within Hall & Partners, it's the life cycle of the project. So the client's having churn, the suppliers are having churn. So the sort of institutional knowledge is becoming really challenging. And so what you used to assume that someone used to know may no longer exist. So just sheer delivery is hard. And so I think whilst we have business strategies that are top of mind and focus, I think what we've all had to adapt to is, we may need to tack and refocus in moments really differently in order to recover differently and plan differently. The other thing I think it's really challenged in terms of planning is training and orientation. It's really forced us to formalize and put in place very purposeful training orientation packages that are digitized so that we can get people working on the ground as quickly as possible with very clear expectations. So the business impact is significant. The last thing I'll say that I've seen with the trend around the Great Resignation is, I think, there's a tendency towards sort of shiny objects around salary and incentives and benefits, which of course there is. Everyone wants to get paid more and everyone wants great benefits. I think that's missing a key ingredient that employees are looking for, which is learning and culture. So I think learning and culture for me about reasons that you stay. So who's going to mentor me? Who's going to look after me? Who's going to give me feedback? And what are the systems and check gates in place to make sure that happens? And the other key thing that's related to learning and development is it's easy to focus on the churn and the activity of those that are leaving. You've got to look after those that are staying. And so learning and development is, I think, for me, such a core anchor for making sure that you try and minimize that churn and that you recreate your culture, but you also infuse that with the new energy of the new people. Yeah. So they're the four things.
That's excellent. Thank you, Natalie. And that's a great point about, focusing on the guys that are staying. And that's, in fact, what this, much of what this is all about is, how can we make more of those people, the guys that are staying, and what are the levers we can pull. So, Piyush, over to you. How about you? What are you seeing in this Great Resignation?
Yeah, no, those are excellent points made by Natalie, all four of them. And since we are supposed to be a little bit countering our arguments, let me give you a little bit of flavor. So I would say, or I would argue, that all of those four themes were underway before the Great Resignation. So it's not that all this just started and then it's just the ingredient of the Great Resignation. I think this was happening even before. I mean, look at the remote workforce we had in the US much before COVID hit, right? Look at the way we were going digital every time in all aspects of our life. Look at how we were focused on learning and culture. Look at how we had to replan at every stage in our life just because business models were getting disrupted, like at an unprecedented level. So I think all these trends that Natalie talked about, they just got accelerated during the last 2 years and have definitely contributed to where we are with the Great Resignation. Another one I would add is agility. I thought I used to be an agile leader. I think COVID made me realize how far off I was. So it's agility on steroids during these times. Again, there were a lot of agile leaders before, that trend was already there, but now it's put that on steroids. So maybe, your question about what is the impact on various industries, I might want to take head on that question. I would say simply the effect of Great Resignation is on the business. You cannot meet your business goals if you don't have your top talent by your side. If you can't retain your best talent, you will not be able to deliver your business goals. So just simply put, again, whether it's now with Great Resignation or before, that statement kind of holds true. Now let's look at various industries and see where the impact is. So Johnson & Johnson is a multi-sector company. We work in pharmaceuticals, in med tech, and in our consumer health business. So we are already into 3 different sectors. And we are seeing variations between these sectors when it comes to the Great Resignation. And that will lead me to talk a little bit more about skills and capabilities. But yes, there are impacts that we are seeing between 3 sectors, and they are different. I would say, if you look at, and I don't know, Andy and Natalie and Vikram, you guys might have seen it. You're going into this restaurant, and that restaurant probably employs 4 people, but the whole door poster is talking about now we are hiring, like go in and apply. And I actually took a photograph of that big poster in Nassau Street in Princeton, New Jersey, just to make myself believe for 4 people that are employed by this restaurant, look at the size of this poster. So, just a simple example of how it's impacting different industries, small businesses, down to the point of just not letting your business deliver. So the other point I would talk about is skills and capabilities. Again, with the theme of this is not a new phenomenon, but it kind of got accelerated during the last couple of years. And, let's take an example, data science or data scientists, people with Python coding experience. That's a skill and a capability that is required in every single industry, in every single geography. And I'm not saying this is World Economic Forum report, talks about how this skill is important, across geographies and across industries. Now, when everybody is trying to seek that talent, and there is a shortage of that talent already, and now the Great Resignation comes, imagine what it will do to that skill and capability. It's just doubling down on that shortage of skills And that's something that we all need to think about. I'll give you an example from our pharmaceutical business. We are talking about real world evidence where we are collecting a lot of data and trying to do drug discovery. That requires a lot of data scientists. And we have realized that it's not that easy to be hiring from outside. And we've started building a lot of those capabilities from inside the company. So those would be the impacts on the business that I would like to talk about.
Thank you. It's interesting you talk about agility as a leader. I'm not on agile anything, but I think you're right. It's become far more important than ever before, and all of these trends have been, as you say, accelerated. So, Dr. Bakrabjit, we maybe come to you. We've spoken about the impact of the Great Resignation, what that's done, and this point that you've never been able to deliver your business goals without keeping your top talent by your side, and that's just becoming harder. As we now look at the sort of connected data approach, then what can organisations do? What are the steps that they can take to try and, if not reverse this attrition, try and manage it?
Sure, I think it's a very pertinent question, and I would like to sort of talk about this approach to employee attrition analytics and how we can circumvent, to a great extent, this apparently insurmountable challenge into broken down into two components. One is the data component. The other is basically the analytical intervention component. Obviously, this will be a slightly technical from the standpoint of explanation, so I will try to keep it as lucid and as simple as possible. So what are the key business questions then that we are really trying to address? The key business questions are predominantly who, why, when, and what. Who is going to leave? It's very important for the business to understand, have that know-how, have that knowledge, have that anticipation well before, so that the business can take some preventive and preemptive measure to arrest this attrition, to retain the employee, especially the hypos and the high performers. So it's absolutely mission critical for us to be able to predict, anticipate ahead of time who is going to leave, who has a higher propensity to leave. But in order for the business to take action, it's important for the business to understand the reason, the drivers for attrition, the drivers for retention, and not only at a macro global level, but at a micro local level, at an individual level. What is triggering this necessity for the employee to think about another option? When we know that, when we are being able to decipher that, then we will be able to take the right action in order to prevent that attrition from happening. So who, followed by why. Then comes the question related to when. It is equally important for us to be able to understand when is that attrition going to happen. And finally, what is it that we can do from the standpoint of preventing that attrition. Now, in order to address these key critical business questions, we need to ensure that the data ecosystem that will give a sort of suitable, emphatic, clear answer to these questions, this data ecosystem is robust, is analytically very, very conducive from decision-making standpoint. And hence comes the question of being able to assess the data maturity of the overall ecosystem in an organization. And the importance of this cannot be undermined. However esoteric, however complex, however involved analytical methods you would like to deploy, if the data that is really being leveraged for those model building and analytical intervention, if the data is not of the highest order, then obviously the answers that we'll get could even be misleading. Garbage in, garbage out. So from that standpoint, different facets of the data in terms of their availability, compatibility, variety, volume, veracity, granularity, history, all these will need to be of the highest order. How do we ensure that? How do we assess the data maturity, and how do we move from a current state to a future ideal state? So let's try and understand that aspect. So here is a sort of an illustration or some sort of an example of a data ecosystem which predominantly will help support analytical intervention to help us answer those questions of who, why, when, and what. Now, in such a complex data ecosystem, we cannot expect all the data facets, all the data attributes, all the variables to be already in place. The purpose of the undertaking this data maturity assessment exercise is to understand, do we have the right data ecosystem with the right variables, right history, right granularity, right quality to address those 4 questions, right? And through that assessment, what's the outcome that we can expect? We can expect outcomes or outputs at at 2 ends of the spectrum. There will be certain data sets, data sources, which are already in place, is of the highest order in terms of quality, completeness, etc., can be readily used. There will be other data facets and data nuances, which will need to be completely built from the scratch. They're simply not available. And then there will be a mixed bag of other data sources, which might be in place, but will need adjustment, tweaks, sometimes even overhauls to get them to a certain level of respectability for analytical consumption. For example, in this specific illustration you are being able to see, the psychometric test in the specific case is on one end of the spectrum. It is just not there. One needs to develop it. Whereas the information related to the employee demographics, age, gender, marital status, education, they are already in place and can be readily used. The other data facets, data sources like the employment history, employment recruitment records, current job, HR engagement, etc., they are at different levels of maturity, and hence they need to be measured and subsequently improved in order for us to make the journey from a current state to an ideal state, which will be achieved through a connected data ecosystem leverage. So let's see what sort of approach one can undertake in order to assess the current state and make the journey towards an ideal state. So based on our extensive experience of working with different organizations and undertaking these sorts of engagement, we strongly recommend what we call as the Delta Grid. And Delta Grid comprises of measurement of different data sources across 5 different levels of data maturity. In this specific case of employee attrition, the key data sources, the broad buckets comprising of employee demographics, current job scenario, HR engagement, recruitment records, employee history, etc., will all have to be assessed across the 5 dimensions of data, enterprise, leadership, target, analyst, across the 5 levels of data maturity for us to assess the current state and carve out associated actions for making the journey from the current state to the ideal state. So what sort of reports can we expect? What sort of outputs and outcomes can we expect from such an exercise? Let's see. These are some of the illustrations with respect to the types of outputs and outcomes that you can expect from this sort of a data maturity assessment exercise. For example, employee demographics. One can really assess the quality, the history, the completeness, etc., for different levels of maturity. It is very much possible that in an organization, the history is at a standardized level, the consistency is at a practitioner level, the veracity is at an intermediate level. These sorts of mixed bags are very much part and parcel of typical data ecosystem. But we need to measure them, we need to be able to assess them so that we know where we stand. And similarly, for employment history, recruitment, HR engagement, etc. And these will have to go further levels down in order for us to be able to measure them very precisely. For example, employee demographics at a top level, once we do an assessment, you go to the next level of age, gender, marital status, etc., and create the same level of assessment. Understand it at the most granular level, measure it, and compare it with the ideal state, identify the gap, and then take the journey, carve out associated actions so that you can move from the current state to an ideal state, making the data conducive and consumable for high quality analytical intervention. That's what I have to share, Andy. So back to you.
Thanks, Doctor. Yeah.
Andy, I wanted to add. Yeah, I just wanted to add, maybe we can go to the previous slide, but just wanted to add about the kinds of data, and Bikramji talked about some really good ones here. I'm just wondering, like when we did this exercise at my former employer, Nielsen, and then now with J&J, we found like there are so many data sources out there that you can tap on and really look at whether they really make a difference between people staying back versus leaving, or are they triggers or drivers of attrition. And I'll give you some examples, because what we see here are really the ones that we all start with. But if you start to go deeper and start to understand what else is out there and how can you use that information. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So employee demographics, for example, looking at diversity. So I know gender diversity is there, but what about minorities? Like having that view might tell you whether that's one of the drivers. It can tell you about culture. If you go to employment history, I think one thing very interesting we found was people who left Nielsen or J&J, and when they came back, they were actually more committed to the company. They had seen that the grass is not as green as they thought it would be, and they have come back to that original company, was actually a driver of retention. So, things like that. Employee recruitment record. This was an interesting one. From our Teleo system, we were able to look at people who applied to more than one job in Nielsen, right? So it's not the first job that they applied, they got in. They are applying it multiple times, more than once. So they're really wanting to get into this company. Is that a driver of retention? Current jobs. One of the things that we always talk about is you can do promotions, and obviously that will have an impact on people staying back, at least for some period of time. What about lateral moves, where your pay grade is not changed, but your manager is changed? Does that make you stay back? Because many times we all know in the HR side of things that you leave your managers, not your companies. There's so much linked to the manager. And then the last one on HR engagement, we have performance rating, but it's also performance rating of the manager. Is that a driver why people are leaving? We are also seeing a lot of survey data. So everybody has some kind of annual survey. So using that data to see what we can pick up about inclusion, culture, leadership, and if those are drivers of people leaving the company. So just giving some more nuance to what Bikram was saying, like there is so much information out there. How do we make sure that we are using them?
Yeah, Piyush, Andy, a build if I may. I think another sort, Piyush, I'm again in danger of agreeing with you, so I'm sorry, everyone. I think another dimension about this is employer brand, which I'll keep going on about, which is Glassdoor ratings. Google ratings, Business Bureau Index and that sort of thing, which I think, albeit it's too late, if that makes sense, someone's obviously unhappy and they're talking publicly about it. It's noise, and it's recruitment noise. So I think for me, it's part of the data picture about how the outside world sees you and your company and how it values and changes and evolves. Yeah.
It's interesting as well. We talk about, an annual employee survey. And we've all, certainly every company that I've worked in has had some form of employee satisfaction survey. But I wonder whether that's sort of timely enough. And it's a great way of assessing how seriously an employer takes their employee feedback, is to see how much is done as a result of this. So, it's obviously it's one tool in the armory, isn't it? But it's by no means the whole answer. And I think you're right, Piyush. There is loads of data. As we've discussed previously, it's only when you start to be able to connect that data. We've talked about it previously when we're trying to get a 360-degree view of a consumer. But it's equally true trying to get a 360-degree view of your own people, right? When you start to connect this data is when you start to actually develop that view. So I think we should go to another poll. We've touched here on some triggers of attrition as we've been going through this. We've sort of obliquely touched on various triggers of attrition. But guys, are we ready for a poll? I'm hoping that we will shortly launch a poll which gives you some choices of what are the triggers of attrition. I think try and answer this not necessarily about yourself, perhaps, but more in terms of what do you think are the most important triggers of attrition. And if you think it's something else, that's all okay to click others. Guys, if you were to pick one, or maybe two, let's be kind. What do you think? What are people most likely to say out of our audience here? So we have no work-life balance, micromanagement of work, career growth, salary, others.
Last time we tried to guess, Andy, we were completely wrong. So let's make another attempt at this one. I don't want to bias the results though. So, in my mind, it's between the top three, which is no work-life balance. I think that's got more prominent now with COVID, but career growth, I think, is very important as well. Micromanagement is another one because of which people leave. So let me take a guess. I would say career growth.
Yeah.
You have multiple choice option as well, Piyush. So if you would like, you can go for more choices.
That's good. So top three.
Top three. Actually, so if we could get someone to vote for a salary and then someone to come up with a new one. We've
exactly. We've hit it. Yeah, I'm going to go with salary and career growth because I think that salary it's such a hygiene factor now, if that makes sense. And it's an easy pull for people. Oh, I can get 20-30% more here. Great. And do I think I'm going to get learning and development and career growth? I think it's the combination of those. I think they're in some ways the pull that is happening in the market right now.
Yeah. And with galloping inflation, actually, being able to move for an increased salary becoming more important than perhaps it was. Okay, I think we've closed the poll. So can we have a look at the results? Dr. Watwell, here we go. Okay, so pretty even career growth, salary, work-life balance, the micromanagement of work, much less of an issue, and others. So I think between us, we covered all of those. It's interesting. I think, Natalie, you were talking about this great reset that people have taken, and perhaps that comes in as others. When we, coming out of COVID, I think there were lots of people that said, okay, well, this is now an opportunity for me to rethink the way that I want to be working and the work that I want to be doing. And maybe that's when we tick others, maybe that's one of the things that's at work there. Okay. So now then, I want to go over to you, Piyush. So we talked about having lots of data, but it's not what you've got, it's what you do with it that counts in the data world, right? So can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, and you set it up exactly right, and it's all about insight without outcome is overhead, yeah. Which is really talking about we will get a lot of insights from this data, we'll take a lot of actions, but if it drives no outcome, then all that we did was overhead. And that's why it's really important to go end to end and also measure your outcomes. So I'll take maybe a couple of minutes and just talk about a Nielsen use case. This was back in 2015. We were looking at a lot of churn within the company. The clients were not happy because they were having to train and retrain new people that were coming on their accounts. It was a real clear business issue. And we took everything that we just talked about, all the data that we could lay our hands on, and started to put together this model, which was now predicting why people were leaving versus why people were staying back. So you can see here similar things around career movement. Lateral move was a good surprise for us because we found that we were doing many more promotions than lateral moves. So, we realized that it's a cost-effective way of making people stay back in the company when it can have as much of an impact as promotions, but it was not being done to the same extent in the company. So it was a really good insight for us. Another one there that you see, this was interesting, of course, manager rating, but also client on-site location. We were actually losing a lot more people that were based client on-site. And at that time, we had quite a few people based on-site with our clients. So that was another one where we realized we had to keep them engaged, make sure that they come to the office at least one day a week and things like that. And then the last one there, I talked about alums, people leaving and coming back. That I think was also another driver that we realized. And guess what? Suddenly, attrition is your friend. Because you've had so much attrition in the past, there is a huge pool of candidates that have worked for your company and are out there. You can now go and target them from a talent acquisition point of view and bring them back, because we've seen that when they come back, they actually stay longer and perform better. And this is something that I found in Johnson & Johnson as well, same story. So two situations and it's come through. So some of the actions that we actually took, we'll see a 1-minute video in just a bit, which is kind of narrating the end-to-end story, but highlighting some of the things that we did, lateral moves. We asked employees to raise their hand if they were ready to rotate. So we took their point of view of what they were saying, that I'm done with this role, I need something new. So factor that in and start to make the matches. And then also other areas that we looked at for retaining talent, client on-site I talked about, and then alums that left the company and came back. So that was this was back in 2015, 2016, where the actions were taken. We were able to identify who are the people that are most likely to leave the company. The president of the business asked all her direct reports to take that list and start having 3-year conversations with them. And we found that we had an outstanding retention rate among the people that were spoken to, and some lateral moves and promotions made among those people. So it was a really good outcome that really helped. We actually attached a financial dollar value to it in terms of being able to save people back. So we were able to get the return on investments on the investment that we were making. That's all I have. Maybe we can play the video now and then move on to the next topic.
Thanks, Piyush. Let's see if we can. I mean, wow, that's excellent. It's like, and that was it. 41% of people that had a move didn't leave it. Yeah, I mean, it's
48%. Yep.
48. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. So thank you very much, Piyush. Dr. Bikramjit, I know that we've done quite a bit of work in this area. Have you got any outcomes of that work that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. As I started by saying that we wanted to sort of segregate the overall approach into two components. The data component. The second is the actual analytical intervention component. So we talked extensively about the database, and also Piyush, Natalie corroborated their experience on the importance of the crux of building a robust, solid data ecosystem to support analytical intervention. I will just quickly walk you through, give you a sort of a bird's eye view on the types of analytical intervention that one needs to undertake in order to reach the desired outcome and take very highly specific prescriptive actions. So as you can imagine that for an engagement of this type, the types of analytical intervention that one has to go through will be extremely involved, will be complex. It starts with the model objective of having those specific questions on who, when, why, and what. And it's supported by, in this specific case, at least the 5 broad buckets of data related to HR engagement, employment history, employee demographics, recruitment data, current job scenarios, etc., and therefore the nuances and sub-buckets and all that. And this entire data will have to go through extensive, rigorous exploratory data analysis, hypothesis testing, feature engineering, transformation, to make them go through the analytical engine, which is at the heart and core. And in this specific situation, it has to be an amalgamation of supervised and unsupervised machine learning, which will give rise to the risk scores at every single individual employee level to be able to classify them as high attrition, moderate attrition, and low attrition buckets. And then on the high attrition risk bucket, you have further focus, you apply deep learning, Cox segregation, and deep serve in order to understand when are they expected to leave. And with these additional information and insights through the application of line, you work out predominantly for each single individual, what are their triggers of attrition, what's the propensity, what is really causing them to think about leaving the attrition, and hence complementarily, what can make them stay back, which is basically the simulator engine that you create. And through that simulator, with multiple iterations, you arrive at a recommendation, which is a prescriptive action for every single employee who are at a high risk bracket. So predominantly, the entire journey from descriptive to prescriptive, supported by cognitive intervention, is basically the whole crux of the AIML framework. So under the hoods, a lot of things happen, and we can quickly have a glance into what are those elements, so that one has a broad understanding of the different facets. Obviously, the exploratory data analysis has to be of the highest order in terms of deriving the insights from the data, making the data compatible for high quality analytical intervention for model building purposes, appropriate transformation, feature extraction, etc. And from there, to move on to the actual models, not restricting only to the base models, but to have hyperparameter fine-tuned models, which will improve the health of the confusion matrix, improve the accuracies, improve the precision, improve the F1 scores, so that you can really rely on the robustness of the outcomes. Two, the prediction scores from the standpoint of when precisely an attrition is expected to happen, what are the specific nuances for a particular individual from a trigger standpoint, etc., etc. So all these things eventually lead to specific outcomes and prescriptions. So what are they? At the end of the day, after going through all these detailed exercises, one will be able to get for every single specific individual in the high attrition risk bucket, their attrition score, their attrition class, potential attrition time frame measured either as a point estimate or as an interval estimate, and primary drivers for them to attrit in the foreseeable future. Very, very specific information which will lead us eventually to prescriptive actions and horses for the courses approach. So while it is very important to get the overall drivers of attrition and retention in place, it is even more important to develop the insight at every single individual level in the high attrition bucket, so that the actions are carved out, tailor-made, which can prevent the attrition from happening. So what sort of impact have we seen working across multiple such engagements across different projects that we have undertaken? We have seen attrition rate being arrested significantly, training cost as a byproduct, as an offshoot, coming down substantially. Efficiency in terms of project execution has improved at a significant facelift. Job satisfaction index improved significantly, and customer satisfaction also had a significant facelift. So all the key financial indicators are positively impacted. The needle had moved both from the point of view of bottom line and top. So after doing all these exercises, if we have to summarize, what's the key summary? I would sort of, painted in 5 key salient points. Our ability to decode the Great Resignation would depend on, predominantly, our ability to understand the factors associated with employee attrition. That's really the key. And secondly, our ability to accurately assess the level of data maturity. We can't jump the gun. We can't put the cart before the horse. We have to make sure that the data maturity is of the highest order before we go into analytical intervention. And for that, we need to make the journey from current state to an ideal state. The agility, the scalability, the flexibility, and the versatility of our ML algorithms, not only to work out the risk scores or the risk buckets, etc., but also to be able to run multiple iterations on a speedy and agile and nimble way, so that the recommendations and carved out tailor-made actions are given on a platter to business so that they can act upon. Number 4, the need to understand the insights at a very granular local level so that tactical decision making can be done. And number 5, our ability to deploy all these learnings to tangible, decisive, concrete actions. So, in summary, the challenge, the attrition problem at hand is daunting, but certainly not insurmountable if we approach it extremely clinically. So back to you, Andy.
Stop, sir. Okay, so I think that's a great place now for us to stop and take some questions from the audience. We have had a question come in, so I'll start with that one. If you have a question, we could probably run over a couple of minutes, I'm sure. So if you have a question, please do type it in. So Khalid asks, given that the over 65 population is increasing, and in fact, according to the World Health Organization, by 2030, 1 in 6 people will be aged 60 or over, and I'll be one of them. Should we consider rehiring these people? What do we think? I mean, it feels. I hope we think yes, but what do we think, guys? And Natalie.
I love this idea. I think will they want to come back is I think more a burning question, but it goes back to where we started. I think there's so much value in experience, and again, different life stages, different points of view, all the rest of it. And so if people are open to it, I would love for them to come back and boomerang back into the workforce should they want to.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I would love to disagree with Natalie, but I can't.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's another one come in here. So Piyush, perhaps if I ask this one to you. From Andy. Everything is different, everything is the same. Why do people leave relationships? Is this perhaps referring back to what we were saying before? People don't leave jobs, people leave bosses. Piyush, any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you were comparing the company versus the manager that you work with, if that is the question, if I'm getting this right. Because that's what we were saying. We were saying people leave managers, not companies. There's so much about the company and the purpose, and you are associated with it. But in your day-to-day work, you spend so much time with your manager. And if that is not working well, sometimes you start looking outside to look for that same kind of purpose, but in another company. And I think that's why traditionally, it's been said, and we do find it when we look at these attrition models, the managers, rating their performance on leadership, their ability to build inclusive culture really matters in terms of retaining your top talent.
Yeah, excellent. I maybe put us all on the spot now. But if you had to take one takeaway from this session that you'd like people to take with them, one piece of advice, one key takeaway, maybe Natalie, I can come to you first on this. What's the one piece of advice you would give employees and or employers?
I think for employees, it would be, there's no better moment to ask for what you want. But in order to ask for what you want, you need to kind of actualize it. So take a moment and really think about where and what you thrive, and then go and talk to your boss, or not your boss, depending on your dynamic, and ask for it. Because employers in this moment are much more likely to listen, to be flexible, to be curious, and to really want to figure it out. So and the other thing is, for employers, have stay interviews, not exit interviews. So make sure that you're talking to your people regularly, you're listening, and you're getting ahead of the curve rather than behind it, which I think is really a challenge. And the other key thing I think for employers is there's a sweet spot of balancing business results and outcomes and being employee-centric. So what do you stand for and how do you connect to people? The other thing for employers I'd say is look at your competitors, borrow for them, but make it better.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, I mean, Piyush made a very good point. I thought that, finding out that somebody is likely to leave and then having a conversation with them seemed to be, a big driver of retention. So I thought that was very interesting. It's just actually having a conversation. So Piyush, what about you? What would you like people to take away from this session?
Yeah, I have to provide some counter view. So from employees' perspective, I would say changing jobs is stressful. So make sure that you look at every growth opportunity within your current organization. That would be my advice. And like we were saying, a year from now, the scenario could change. It may not be great resignation. It might be great reinvention, where you're reinventing your career, but it could be in the same company. From an employer's standpoint, proactively retain your top talent, because then you'll be able to deliver your business goals. And if you're able to retain your top talent, they will fail to disappoint you. That would be my advice.
Thank you very much, Piyush. And Doctor, how about you? A key takeaway from you?
Yeah, so great resignation or no great resignation. So times will evolve, but I think foundationally, organizations, employers need to invest in these sorts of exercises on a regular basis. It's extremely critical to retain top talents. And from that standpoint, these exercises will need to be done proactively. Engagement with the employees will have to happen proactively so that the employees feel that the organization cares and are making all the best efforts to retain them, right? Should not be only when there is a demand-supply related imbalance. Today that's the scenario, tomorrow it may not be. But the initiative from an organization standpoint must continue. And from an employee standpoint, I would say whenever an employee sees that the employer is reaching out to them for having those constructive dialogues related to their career, related to their growth, related to their prosperity within the organization, they should feel that they are getting valued. So before looking out, they should really think that whether I can invest further in this organization and can make a career in this organization itself. So that's the way I look at this entire proceedings.
Thank you. So there are some more questions coming in, but I think we're going to have to draw this to a close now. So I want to thank my fellow panelists for taking the time to join and for being so interesting. And Piyush, thank you for trying to find areas to disagree with. I think you're relatively successful there. I want to thank as well the attendees. We've had some great questions which have really demonstrated that people have been engaged in this subject. And why not? It's an important subject for all of us as employees, as well as for us as business leaders. So I want to thank you for your engagement here. There will be an opportunity for you to give some feedback on this session afterwards. And you'll be able to see the recording of this on our website in due course, along with some other materials. So look out for the next edition of the Connected Data webinar series, which will be coming, I hope, soon. Thanks again to the panel. Thanks to the attendees. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.